April 5, 1992, Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina. The morning began with the sound of church bells tangled with the echo of gunfire. On the Miljacka River, fog rolled low over the bridges, swallowing the outlines of buildings that once carried the laughter of a cosmopolitan city. By noon, the fog had lifted, revealing sandbags, barricades, and silhouettes of armed men watching from the hills. A woman named Amira Kovacevic crossed the intersection near the Holiday Inn, clutching a loaf of bread. She had done this dozens of times before. The locals called it Sniper Alley. They knew which walls to press against, which corners to avoid. But that day, the wind shifted. The sniper's line of sight cleared. A crack split the air clean, sharp, like glass breaking. Amira fell. The bread rolled from her hand into the gutter, soaking in the rainwater mixed with dust. The siege of Sarajevo had begun. From the surrounding slopes, Trebević, Igman, and Mount Juch Serb forces under the command of General Ratko Mladić encircled the city. Nearly 13,000 soldiers of the Yugoslav People's Army JNA turned their guns inward. Mortars, heavy machine guns, and 120mm howitzers were stationed on every ridge, every apartment block with a clear line of fire. Inside the ring were 350,000 civilians. They had no safe passage, no electricity, and no reason to believe anyone was coming to save them. By nightfall, the city's radio crackled with desperate updates. "Stay low," a voice warned. "Do not run across open streets. The shooters are active." They were not soldiers, most of them just office workers, children, musicians, teachers, artists, trapped in a war that erased titles and replaced them with survival. Shells landed rhythmically, 3 in Baskarcia, 2 near the TV tower, 1 near a hospital. The explosions were not random. They were maps of fear, drawn in fire and shrapnel. Through the night, Sarajevo burned in small patches, the scent of wood smoke mixed with cordite. Families sat in basements by candlelight, listening for the whistle of shells. It was said you never heard the one that would kill you, only the next one. In the hospital on Koševo Hill, surgeons worked without anesthesia. The generator coughed and failed. They tied flashlights to their foreheads and operated while glass trembled in the windows. A nurse counted the wounded that day, 42 civilians, 6 dead. One of them was Amira. She was buried in a courtyard, beneath the same cherry tree her husband had planted before the war. The next morning, children drew pictures in the shelters tanks, broken houses, sons with smiling faces. The teachers told them to draw anything but guns. But even their sons had bullet holes. Each day blurred into the next. Sarajevo became a city of whispers. People moved like shadows, timing their walks with the bursts of gunfire. Bread lines became funerals waiting to happen. Those who dared to cross the exposed avenues often recited prayers before stepping out. "If I die," they would say, "tell them I was not afraid." Above, the snipers watched through their scopes trained soldiers from the army of Republika Srpska. Some claimed they fired only when ordered. Others didn't need orders. The distance between life and death was the width of a trigger pull, the pressure of a finger. On May 2, 1992, the city was completely cut off. Roads were mined. The airport controlled by the UN became the only link to the outside world, but even that corridor was deadly. Aid convoys were hit before they reached the warehouses. By summer, water lines were destroyed, and residents began collecting rainwater in buckets. Electricity flickered for a few minutes each day. When it came, people cooked, washed, and phoned relatives, all in those precious minutes of light. In those moments, Sarajevo still felt human. You could hear music faintly from a cellar, a violin playing over the echo of mortars. Someone laughed. Someone else cried. both sounded the same in the dark. The city had entered a new reality where streets had names only in memory, and where the sky itself had become an enemy. The first snow fell in November 1992. It didn't cover the ruins, it filled them. Roofless apartments became white bowls. Shattered trams froze mid-track, buried under silence. The cold didn't just seep through the walls, it invaded lungs, bones, thoughts. By then, Sarajevo had been under siege for more than 7 months, and the city was starving. In the basements, people burned books to stay warm. Not out of disrespect, but because the pages of poetry burned slower than firewood, and every spark meant another minute of life. One man, a librarian named Dragan, said he could still remember the sound of paper curling in the flames like whispered prayers for the dead. The bread ration was 100 grams per person. When it arrived at all, flour was worth more than gold. People mixed sawdust, powdered milk, and grass into dough. Children's bellies swelled, their skin turning pale and translucent. Hospitals ran out of medicine, then bandages, then morphine. Surgeons used fishing line for stitches. They sterilized scalpels in boiling rainwater. A mother named Yasna lost her 2-year-old daughter to pneumonia that winter. The hospital had no oxygen, no antibiotics. She carried the body home in a blanket because cemeteries were full, and snipers shot at funerals. She buried her child in the snow behind an apartment block without a marker, without a name. Later, she would say to a journalist, "The hardest part was pretending she was asleep." Every night, the shelling grew heavier. Mortars whistled down like falling stars. The residents of Sarajevo learned to count the seconds between impact and silence. It became a kind of heartbeat, the rhythm of survival. They said if you could hear the whistle, you were safe. It was the one you didn't hear that found you. By January, hunger became a collective hallucination. People dreamed of bread as if it were a lost lover. In the markets, rats were trapped and sold quietly, one for a pack of cigarettes. Some UN rations reached the city: tins of beans, powdered soup, biscuits stamped US, Army, but not enough. Desperation bred its own economy. A single can of Spam could buy a winter coat. And so, Sarajevo became a city of trades: water for medicine, bullets for sugar, a photograph for a loaf of bread. Inside the bombed-out National Library, volunteers tried to save what they could: charred manuscripts, Ottoman scrolls, burned books that once told the history of Bosnia's coexistence. More than 1.5 million volumes were destroyed in the fire of August 1992. The ashes of that knowledge still drifted through the air months later, black snow over a city already buried under grief. The sound of the cello echoed one morning in February 1993, on a street where 22 people had died in a bread line days earlier. A man named Vedran Smilovic sat on a wooden chair among the craters, dressed in black. He played Albinoni's Adagio in G minor while the shells fell in the hills above. He played not for hope, but for memory. And those who heard it said the music made the silence afterward unbearable. Even under siege, love did not disappear. Couples married in basements. Rings fashioned from melted spoons. Children were born nearly 3,000 times during the siege to the sound of artillery. The hospitals listed their births between casualty reports. Life and death shared the same page, the same hour, the same room. Spring of 1993 brought little relief. The snow melted, revealing graves beneath courtyards and gardens. The streets smelled of smoke, wet stone, and rot. Water trucks became targets. Civilians lined up with buckets under sniper sights. Some didn't return. Their buckets rolled away, still half full. In those months, a new word entered Sarajevo's language: adaptacija, adaptation. It meant learning to live with horror as if it were weather. People no longer asked when the war would end, only whether tomorrow would be quieter. And somewhere in the city, under candlelight, Dragon the librarian wrote a single line in the margin of a burned book: "They can destroy everything, except the will to remember." Spring, 1993. The mountains surrounding Sarajevo were greening again, but the city below them remained gray, a wound that refused to heal. Supplies were nearly gone. Children fainted from hunger in classrooms that no longer had windows, and yet whispers began to circulate. There's a way out. It started as rumor a tunnel being dug beneath the airport, under the watch of the United Nations. On the surface, the airport was neutral ground, controlled by UNPROFOR troops, but beyond its runways lay the front lines of the army of Republika Srpska. Any movement across that open field meant death. Still, beneath that field, a handful of engineers and miners began to dig. The tunnel's entrance was hidden beneath a small house in the neighborhood of Dobrinja, the home of a man named Bajro Kolar. In March 1993, they began working day and night with shovels, picks, and their bare hands. The air was suffocating, no ventilation, no lights except candles. Water seeped from the soil, turning the floor into mud. The men carried out buckets of earth on their backs. Each day, they advanced a few meters. The work was forbidden, secret, and desperate. For 142 days, hundreds of volunteers dug in shifts. They called it Tunel Spasa, the Tunnel of Hope. By July 1993, it broke through to the other side into the neighborhood of Butmir, which was still under Bosnian government control. The passage was only about 800 meters long, 1 meter wide, and 1.5 meters high, but it became the artery that kept the city alive. Through it, people carried food, medicine, weapons, even cables for electricity and phone lines. Every night, hundreds crawled through it, sometimes under mortar fire, sometimes carrying the wounded, sometimes the dead. UN soldiers were forbidden to interfere, but many turned a blind eye. They knew what the tunnel meant. Without it, Sarajevo would have starved. Those who passed through never forgot the sound, the dripping of groundwater, the thud of footsteps, the muffled breaths of people praying in the dark. Inside that narrow space, fear was constant, but so was purpose. "If I crawl 1 more meter," one man said, "my children will eat." On the surface, the siege continued. Snipers didn't stop. Shells still fell every hour. But the tunnel changed something invisible. It gave the city back its pulse. In late 1993, for the first time in over a year, bread arrived in larger quantities. Flour from humanitarian aid convoys came through the tunnel and into the bakeries that still stood. The smell of baking bread drifted through ruined streets, a scent so simple it felt like defiance. Then came the market massacres. On February 5, 1994, at around 12:10 p.m., a 120mm mortar shell landed in the Markhale marketplace in the city center. It killed 68 civilians instantly and wounded over 140. The images, bodies, vegetables, blood mixing on cobblestones shocked the world. CNN, BBC, Reuters all carried the footage. International outrage followed, but outrage didn't stop the next shell. Residents began numbering the dead on walls, 1, 2, 3, until the numbers faded beneath soot and smoke. The city cemetery filled beyond capacity. Parks and playgrounds became graveyards. Still, life continued. Weddings were held among tombstones. Soccer matches played in streets cratered by mortars. Musicians performed underground, their audiences sitting on the floor, eyes closed, imagining a world with sky. In June 1994, the tunnel was reinforced with wooden beams, Electric lines ran through it. It became Sarajevo's spinal cord, its breath under the mountain. Soldiers carried weapons in one direction. Civilians crawled the other way carrying bags of rice, cigarettes, medicine. Every journey took about 2 hours. Every journey could be your last. Outside, the city was still bleeding but slower. Aid trickled in. Hope did too. The people of Sarajevo began to tell themselves a quiet truth. We may be trapped, but we are not broken. And somewhere above, in the hills where snipers once ruled, wildflowers began to bloom through the shell craters, yellow, fragile, defiant. August 28, 1995, Sarajevo, Bosnia. The air was still, the sky too blue. It had the kind of silence that people in this city had learned to fear. Just before 11 a.m, the marketplace at Markale was full again. Vendors selling onions, apples, bread, and cigarettes. After years of siege, even small gatherings felt like rebellion. Mothers haggled. Children chased pigeons between stalls. A man tuned his radio to catch the noon news. Then it happened. A single mortar shell, 120 millimeters, fired from the slopes of Mount Trebovic, fell directly into the crowd. The blast tore through everything. 43 people were killed instantly. 80 more were maimed, burned, or blinded. The cobblestones turned red again, just as they had 18 months before. The same street, the same market, the same silence after the sound. Among the victims was a teenage boy named Adnan, 16, who had gone to buy flour for his mother. Witnesses later said he was still standing when they found him, clutching the paper bag in his arms, as if protecting it from the shrapnel. In the footage that would soon circle the world, he appeared for only 2 seconds, a figure lost in smoke and dust. Within hours, the United Nations and NATO confirmed the origin of the shell fired from positions held by the Bosnian Serb army, commanded by General Ratko Mladic. It was not the first atrocity, but it would be the last straw. By evening, NATO launched Operation Deliberate Force, a bombing campaign targeting Serb artillery and command centers around Sarajevo, Pale, and other strongholds. The city, after 425 days under siege, began to hear a different kind of explosion, one that came from above, aimed outward, not inward. Civilians listened from basements, not cheering, not celebrating. They had learned not to trust the sky. But still something shifted in the air that night. A sense that the walls around them were cracking, that the world had finally heard their screams. Over the following weeks, airstrikes destroyed dozens of Serb positions. Mortar fire slowed. Convoys began to move. The shelling that had once fallen every hour came only a few times a day, then a few times a week. In October 1995, the guns finally went quiet. The siege was over. But the silence that followed was heavier than any sound. Sarajevo emerged from the ruins like a ghost city. Of its 350,000 trapped civilians, nearly 11,500 were dead, among them 600 children, more than 50,000 wounded, 35,000 homes destroyed, 2/3 of hospitals damaged, and every single family broken in some way. The survivors walked through the streets, touching the walls with their hands, as if to make sure they were real. The buildings were pocked with bullet holes. The facades looked like stone faces scarred by grief. A young man spray-painted on a ruined wall, "Welcome to Sarajevo, the world's longest death row." For years afterward, the city would live with its ghosts. The roses of Sarajevo, those red resin-filled scars left on the pavement where shells had landed, became silent memorials. Every step in the city center crossed over one, and yet, Sarajevo refused to die. In 1996, the first film festival opened, held in a basement. with a white sheet for a screen. The same streets that had once echoed with gunfire now carried the sound of applause. People began to rebuild brick by brick, memory by memory. The tunnel of hope was turned into a museum. Visitors walked through its damp corridor and listened to recordings of those who crawled through it in darkness. Their voices trembled, not from fear, but from remembering. For the rest of their lives, they would carry the sound of that siege, the whistle of shells, the echo of the cello, the silence of hunger, the whisper of survival. Between April 1992 and February 1996, Sarajevo endured 425 days of siege, the longest in modern history. Nearly 329 mortar shells fell each day. A total of 13,952 people were killed, including 5,434 civilians and 1,601 children. Over 56,000 wounded. The average weight loss of an adult citizen during the winter of 1993 was 30 kilograms. UN reports confirmed the deliberate targeting of civilians, hospitals, and cultural heritage. More than 35,000 buildings were damaged or destroyed, including the National Library and countless religious landmarks. But statistics cannot measure what was truly lost. A city that once symbolized coexistence, where mosques, synagogues, and cathedrals stood within sight of each other, was turned into a laboratory of hate. Today, Sarajevo stands rebuilt, yet scarred. Its skyline is a mix of glass towers and shrapnel-pocked concrete. The laughter has returned, but it echoes differently, softer, more fragile, and beneath every rebuilt street lies the memory of those who never returned. History often remembers wars through victories and borders. But Sarajevo asks a quieter question. What is victory when survival itself becomes the only triumph? What are your thoughts on the siege of Sarajevo, a city buried under ashes, yet still breathing? Please share them below.